Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now move into course session 2, Firms and Transformation, ESG's Next Wave, Beta Activism via Sustainability, Impact and a Just Transition. The session will be chaired by Bryan Lim, Executive Director and Head of Dana Impact and Healthcare, Khazanah. He'll be joined by Addy, Partner and Head of Market Impact, Southeast Asia, the Bridgespan Group. Rahman, Advisor, Institutional Investors Council, Malaysia. Quyen, Tran, Director of Impact Investing and Head of Fundamental Equities, Sustainable Investing Research, BlackRock. And Rahul Malhotra, Head of Group Brand Strategy and Stewardship, Shell. Please welcome our panel speakers.
Welcome to the session after lunch. I hope your gastronomic needs are fulfilled. If not by the food, then by Professor Hajun Chang's book on edible economics. Right. So this is widely known as the graveyard shift. So my panelists and I are going to try our best to keep you at the edge of your seat, keep everybody engaged. I think I'm going to do something different, which is that even midway through the panel discussion, if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hands, and we don't need to wait until the last 15 minutes for Q&A, okay? So what are we going to talk about? This session is about firms. We've spoken about the macroeconomics earlier. Our central bank governor has given a quick update on Malaysia, and thankfully, we're in a good state. But despite that, I think the global challenges remain. The title of KMF this year itself says it all, a perfect storm. Right? I think in terms of what could go wrong in the world, almost everything is going wrong, right? With war, pandemic, we're heading towards a recession, and many predict that it could be an extended period of low growth and even stagflation as well. So what are we going to do about it, right? With a global context like this, the systematic risks in the industry or in the economy is probably at unprecedented levels. So just to get everybody on the same page, systematic risk in investments lingo refers to risks that cannot be diversified away. Right? It's systematic in nature. It does not apply specifically to a company or an industry. If that is the case, what can investors do? What can corporates do about it? Right. So this brings me to the topic of our discussion today on beta activism, which is a relatively new concept. So beta activism can be defined as, let me check, institutional investors who look beyond trading of securities, not just trading of securities, but move towards a system level of thinking, i.e. to drive change on targeted issues, right? Issues which we've spoken about today, climate change, board governance, gender diversity, etc. The objective of this is to reduce overall market risks so that investors get better long-term risk-adjusted returns. This movement has been gaining momentum in developed markets, and even in Malaysia, our regulators such as Bank Negara, Securities Commission, and Bursa are also putting in place best practices and corporate governance in order to basically achieve these objectives, which are synonymous with beta activism. So a lot of big words, and to help us unpack it a little bit more today, we have our distinguished panelists. I'm going to start giving a brief intro of each of them. If I give the full intro, I think I might take up the entire length of our discussion today. So, with permission to summarize it a little bit. Firstly, we have Quyen. Quyen joined us from BlackRock. BlackRock needs no introduction. It is today the largest asset manager in the world with almost $10 trillion of asset under management. And Quyen is actually the director of impact investing and head of sustainable investing research for fundamental equities. That's quite a mouthful. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I were to simplify that in layman's terms, Quyen sets the rules for BlackRock and its clients to think about what qualifies as impact investing and impact investing and measurement for all asset classes. And today, BlackRock has around $500 billion under asset management in this topic, under this topic, in this space. Committed to this cause, Quyen also partners with academia and industry practitioners. She's a professor of practice in impact investing at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and she's also a member of Harvard Business School's Alumni for Impact Investing. Secondly, we have, jump to Leah Rahman. Right. Ms. Leah Rahman will be sharing her views on this topic, also from the perspective of an investor, albeit a slightly different angle. Right. Leah is currently advisor to the Institutional Investor Council of Malaysia, which, amongst others, is envisioned to represent the interests of institutional investors and be the platform to influence good corporate governance culture by public listed companies. This is a continuation of her work as she was a founding management team member of Malaysia's MSWG, Minority Shareholders Watch Group, where she spent about 20 years of her career. So needless to say, Leah's interest is in the matters of corporate governance and shareholder activism, and we look forward to hearing her passionate views on this topic. And then we have Rahul. Rahul is Shell's Global Head of Group Brand Strategy and Stewardship. Rahul is going to share views from a corporate point of view on our topic today. And obviously, everyone knows that oil and gas is in the thick of action around conversations on ESG. But actually, what fascinated me about Rahul is not just his work in Shell on this matter, but also his personal passion and his actual personal time spent to inspire organizations and people to make a difference in society and environment. So Rahul has lived in 6 countries in this world. He's a passionate historian and an economist, and something very interesting as well, he was actually a professional musician before entering the corporate world. And finally, we have Chris. Chris is a partner at the Bridgespan Group. He is also head of market impact at Southeast Asia. So Chris has spent 13 years at Bridgespan Group, which is a spin-off from Bain Consulting. And Bridgespan Group is actually a non-profit organization, non-profit business that advises organizations, investors, philanthropies on matters such as strategy, leadership development, and impact investments. Chris' diverse experience spans working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, again, which needs no introduction, and impact investing funds like TPG Rise, as well as companies, small companies like startup social enterprises, as well as Fortune 100 companies. Chris' passion for social environment probably evidenced even in his younger days, as he actually started his career as a science and math teacher, as well as also a marine and outdoor instructor, bringing teenagers on mountain hiking, free diving, and community service trips. So this is our panelists this afternoon. I hope everybody will enjoy this session as I kick it off with Quyen. Okay. So Quyen, back to our topic on beta activism. Could you share with us what is BlackRock's most recent thoughts around this space? What are you seeing in terms of the trend globally, as well as do you think there is a good case for this in Malaysia?
Absolutely. So beta activism, as you described it in your introduction, it's inextricably linked to long-term performance for companies. And if you want to look at cases for investing in companies with a systematic lens, with a structural lens, there are several cases that can be made. I'll mention one. I'm sure we'll get into others, especially with the threat of climate change. But I'll mention one from an economic lens. So we know, unfortunately, especially after the pandemic, the worst of the pandemic, that there's far more problems in the world, social and environmental, than there are solutions. There's far more. I mean, even before the pandemic, there was more problems than there are solutions. And the United Nations recognizes this, right, with the adoption of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in late 2015, adopted by all 193 member states. And the estimate for just developing countries alone to meet those goals by 2030 was about 2.5 trillion in a shortfall. So we needed a gap to be filled annually of 2.5 trillion just for developing markets alone. And that number has been estimated to triple, since the pandemic. And so we know, because of that economic principle of supply-demand imbalance, where there's far more demand for solutions than there is supply, solutions for healthcare, for the elderly, for our aging population, solutions for those who don't have access to basic healthcare, solutions for financial inclusion, access to the internet, education, and then, of course, all the solutions we need, to help mitigate climate change. There's not enough solutions. And so if you're a company, does this work? A little bit? Thank you. So if you're a company whose products and services helps provide those solutions, or if you're improving your operations as a company, thank you. Or if you're improving your operations to provide these solutions for your employees, for your stakeholders, that supply-demand imbalance is in your favor. You have a structural growth tailwind that will help your company in its growth potential, and arguably its financial health and potential for alpha and outperformance. So from that systematic structural lens of supply-demand for the world's problems and the solutions we need, companies that can pivot their operations and adjust or innovate in new products and services, they're positioned to do well over the long term and generate that alpha. And we need as many of them as possible. And so there's a really compelling case for returns, despite all the problems that we see, in the world today. So that's one argument for the case for returns and alpha from a systematic lens when you analyze companies. And there's others that I'm sure we'll go into.
Would anybody like to respond to that?
Well, I think one other topic that I'd layer in on top of beyond the economic case is just from a talent perspective. I think when you look at what stakeholders care about today, what employees coming out of school, coming out of business schools prioritize, the ability to attract the best talent really requires investors and others to take a part of this impact lens, beta activism as a part of what they are doing, to be able to get the best talent, to be able to then drive the best returns for their shareholders and to attract them overall. When we were working with, you mentioned we worked with TPG, and when they launched the RISE Fund, one of the theses that they had was that they would actually also get better visibility and pipeline for entrepreneurs because they had a dedicated impact vehicle that was going to draw entrepreneurs to them, and that bore out in really powerful ways for them. So it gave them not only better access to talent on their own team, but better pipelines for their private investments that they could deploy to the kinds of companies that Quyen talked about that have better economic odds of being successful. And one other just anecdote from that experience that I think layers into all of this is one of the co-founders of that fund was Bono, the lead singer of U2. And one of the things that he said when the fund was launched and said regularly to us was that it's not that capitalism is immoral, it's that it is amoral and it needs our instruction. And I think all the beta activism, the ESG, the impact investing, the things we'll talk about, they're components of those instructions that can help bring a little bit more moral compass to capitalism.
I just would like to ask Ms. Yuan, right? Yeah. I know that BlackRock has been very aggressive in terms of even your voting decision against against independent directors per se, right? So I want to know that when you talk about, of course, Bryan mentioned about beta activism, you have focused, certain focused issues, and that's what we have been doing. Even those days when you talk about shareholder activism, we talk about governance, we talk about environment, and we talk about social, not as much as now. But I know that BlackRock has voted against resolution against independent directors of our large companies in Malaysia last year. So what actually your follow-up action? Do you engage with them thereafter, or you just let it be just a warning? Because we want to learn from your lesson how you look at companies. Yeah.
So that's a great question. We have a wonderful head of BlackRock Investment Sustainability team that guides our firm on voting principles, and engagement is always a top priority. That's actually one of the top toolkits that we have, and each vote is very specific. So I think it would be most helpful if we took a look at that specific case so that we can give that feedback to be most helpful. So we can certainly follow up with that. But engagement, to your question, it's definitely one of the top tools that we want to use, and not just vote blindly.
If I may just support what Quyen said in the very beginning, beta activism and what Chris said is actually a trigger for something that I think corporations are starting to realize, and many more have to acknowledge that it's not really a trade-off as some people make out to be to drive impact and shareholder returns. If you look at the bigger picture, and if you also look at some of the principles by Professor Chang in the morning about taking a long view to development and to change, in the socio-economic political ecosystem of the planet today, I believe the only player who can make a real impact on the 17 SDGs is the corporation. And the private corporation, in my view, has to realize that and step up to the challenge. And there are a couple of reasons I would say that. First and foremost, the market valuation of our corporations today, the size of these companies, are bigger than the GDPs of certain countries. This is no longer 200 years ago where the nation state or the church was powerful. Today it's the private corporation. Secondly, the reach and impact and the touch points of these corporations. A statistic I often use, and Malaysia has 31 million people. Donald Trump on Twitter, when he was at his peak, had about 89 million followers. But Nike, the shoe company, on Instagram has 290 million followers. A single statement by Nike can change the perceptions of hundreds of millions of people. If you look at the FMCG companies and companies with deep distribution, indirect, they impact millions and millions of jobs. So the choice of who they hire, which socioeconomic strata they come from, what levels of ability do they have, or what gender they are, can change entire societies. So the second point is reach. Thirdly, corporations are trusted far more than government, sorry to speak. If you look at the general public's trust and belief in who can make their lives better. Finally, the corporation stakeholders, such as employees, as Chris said, or investors, are increasingly asking for change. So if you can make a difference, if you are asked to make a difference, the real challenge then is a single word, how. And I'd love to sort of share a little bit later on how corporations can actually meet the needs of a multi-stakeholder world.
Maybe this is a great time to segue to Chris, if you could share with us on the how part, as I think you work with, as I was introducing earlier, lots of corporations, their foundations, or pure philanthropies, organizations. How are they thinking around this question of how do I make an impact? And probably share with us some of the best practices.
Sure. Happy to. So there are, corporations are incredibly diverse, and then when you expand that to some of the organizations that you mentioned, you end up with an incredibly wide array. So I can highlight a couple of approaches and principles, but I'm sure the rest of the panel has a lot to add as well. I think sometimes when we get to the space of impact or ESG, sustainability, some of that can be intimidating for investors, where it's a new set of acronyms and language that they may not be accustomed to. But I'd argue that investors are perhaps better equipped than almost any other organization to actually make decisions that account for these factors, because investors are in organizations that are accustomed to rigorously interrogating facts and data to make decisions. Analyst reports, pitch books, you don't just take the pitch book from somebody and say, oh, great, right? You're digging in, poking holes, and this is the same thing, right? You need to take the critical lens, poke holes in what you're hearing, take a step back and ask if it really makes sense, and then drive forward. So why doesn't that always happen? One of the biggest reasons is just incentives. Investors are generally incented to move large amounts of money relatively quickly and prioritize financial returns. Now, in the impact investing space, there are a handful of instances, about 3 to 5% of impact funds actually tie comp and their carry to impact performance, to quantitative impact performance. So they will rigorously measure that, drive that forward, and that will start to really change behavior on what people prioritize. About 20% of funds will account for impact in some way, perhaps a bit more qualitatively. The rest are still, though they may be labeled an ESG fund, an impact fund, generally comp and incentives are fully structured around financial performance as usual. Other things you can do is obviously getting a team in place. If you expect the same team that you've always had to be able to magically shift and build the pattern recognition, the skills and capabilities to identify opportunities, pursue those opportunities effectively, it's unlikely that that will lead to success on a regular basis. And I think more broadly, when we look at ESG or beta activism, there are a set of sort of baseline dimensions that we'd hope everybody can align to, whether that's around sustainability, labor practices, DE&I, et cetera. And also what we encourage organizations to do is pick some high notes, pick some places where you're actually going to be exceptional, right? So Khazanah launching Dana Impact, that's an example of a high note where you're carving out a certain set of assets with an explicit impact mandate and investing behind that. Other companies might focus on DE&I and say that's a place where we're going to be really exceptional. We're going to meet the bar everywhere else, but we're going to be exceptional there. So finding those places to really lean in and push forward. So I'll pause there. I can share more about some bringing in sort of foundations and their approaches in a moment, but we'll give the others a chance to chime in.
Quyen, would you like to add to this?
Sure. I'll just note, and also because Chris is a consultant providing advice on such matters, it is just very true. It's hard to do alone. We are the largest asset manager in the world, but there's no way we would do it alone or can. And we seek partnerships with thought partners in the scientific world, in academia, anywhere that's useful. And you can't do it alone. So if you are just starting and you're trying to focus on 1 or 2 topics that you can excel in, ask your peers, ask consultants, ask, the asset managers, what do you look for? What are my peers doing? What are best practices that you see? Let's say I am a food producer and I want to improve my impact and mitigate against climate and other social risks. And I know that BlackRock, as an asset manager, looks at plenty of other of my competitors. I can ask BlackRock, well, what do you see as best practices? And what makes sense for a larger food producer versus a smaller food producer? So just ask the questions. Now, impact measurement and progress is very hard to do, but it shouldn't prevent you from starting, because once you start, it provides a virtuous cycle for learning how to measure your progress and get better. The tools are there to get started, as imperfect as they are. They're still very useful. And so just don't feel you have to do it alone as a corporation. There's a lot of people who really want to help and can help.
Great, thank you. Leah, if I may, do you see green shoots of better activism happening in Malaysia? And what are your views? How in your role and your influence as corporates start to think along this space, how do we keep them accountable and keeping to the promise? How do we keep them honest?
Like you mentioned earlier, right, Bryan, beta activism is actually new term that we use in terms of shareholder activism. But the areas that you see we're going to focus, like climate change, like board governance, even the social aspect, I think has been there. But the thing that I want to focus now is about board governance. Because without governance, all this will be greenwashing. It will not happen in substance. So board governance is very important. But before you can make impact to your investee companies, right, you yourself have to clean up your house, which I noticed some of our institutional investors, sorry to say this, I'm not here to say something that you all like to hear, but this is the truth that all of us are aware of. Even the institutional investors, they do not walk the talk. I mean, you're talking about, for example, you're talking board of government, board composition. When you have in the recently published PGG for the GLIC, for example, they said that politicians are not encouraged to be on companies' board, on the board of GLICs. But we still have GLC having politicians on board. See? And how do you, and in our recent code that we published, one of the key governance aspects that we will focus on will be we do not encourage active politicians on the company's board, where we advise our signatories to either you abstain or vote against. You cannot support that resolution because we know that institutional investors, if you vote for, it will be carried. So it's like a done deal. Minority shareholders got no voice. So that's what we're saying. And we talk about, in the PGG document, they mentioned that even you want to appoint active politician on your board, that might be a screening process. My question is that, who did the screening? And how the screening process? More often than not, we know the reality is these people, most of them actually appointed because of certain, connection, relationship. And do you realize that this is something that I think, if you're talking about governance reform, we need to change this. Every time there's a change of head of government or whatever, we always change the head honchos. Right? So it's very disruptive to business. I always advocated against politics being mixed with businesses because it's very disruptive. And sorry to say this, appointing active politicians on any company board or GLICs for that matter is always bad news compared to good news. That's in my perception. I think it's very important, for example, even at the GLC's level, right? The appointment of directors should be given, the nomination committee should be given full authority to decide who actually the board members are capable to add value to the company, not using the special shareholders' right. I'm only against special shareholders' right, allowing the government, right, to appoint directors on GLC's board. That right should be removed because we already have sufficient rules and regulation, legal framework, to establish that that is the standard of governance that we are trying to pursue. So they should not get involved in any appointment of directors because it's very disruptive. And we know we can see it happening. Yeah.
Thank you for your views. I think...
And just another one, sorry. That is on the, I'm talking still on the board composition. We are shouting for having 30% women and at least one woman to be on board, right? And we are pushing about 30% women on board. Even our finance minister saying he's going to push for that. But before that, like I say, look at the internal governance of the institutional investor. First of all, you must have 30% before you push the company to have 30% on board.
I think as a country, Malaysia is in the process. I do believe that we are heading towards the right direction. It will take time, and perhaps this is a great segue to the next concept that I want to bring about, which is called just transition, which I think Dr. Faisal mentioned in his opening speech a little bit, and maybe I could just read again what that might mean. Just transition. It's been mentioned a lot recently. It broadly refers to the process of making the economy, or in this case, corporates, and how corporates operate in an environment in a way that is as fair and inclusive as possible to everyone that is concerned, creating decent work opportunities, leaving no one behind. I think the concept was first introduced more applicable to the climate change initiatives, but I look at it actually to apply more broadly as well. And perhaps at this point, Rahul, if I could pick your brains and poke a little bit, that obviously, oil and gas companies has been bearing the brunt of accusations of greenwashing and whether we are walking the talk. Could you share a little bit about how Shell has pivoted a transition internally in terms of its strategy, and of course in your role in terms of branding and communicating it to external stakeholders? I was just looking at the Global Shell website, and the 4 items that was displayed on its homepage was the Ukraine war, was Shell's commitment to being net zero by 2050, and then there was a new initiative for its clients on fleet management and accelerating decarbonization, and I think there's one more, I think, on diversity. So it's great that Shell is putting this up front and center. If you could share a little bit with us the process that you went through to arrive at where we are today.
Happy to. So while my title is brand strategy, it's a one brand company. So what the company does in actions reflects on the brand, which is why my main focus is on influencing what I call story doing, as opposed to a lot of storytelling. 6-7 years ago, Shell articulated its purpose with my team's help, which is primarily rooted in the insight and the fact that out of the 7.5 billion people on Earth today, about 800 million have zero access to energy today. Another 1 billion have intermittent access to energy, right? So I grew up in India, where it was normal to not have electricity for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Even during your exams, you deal with it. Given that situation, and the fact that we are adding 2 more billion babies on Earth, you're looking at a world that needs more energy to power progress. Because you cannot go to, as you said in Just Transition, you cannot go to a person in an emerging market and say, you cannot cool your baby in the summer, or you cannot build this road to sell your watermelon at a better price in the village, because that road is going to be made from bitumen, which comes from fossil fuels. They're going to say, to hell with it, I want progress. I want my iPhone, which comes from plastics, which comes from fossil fuels. So in order to meet the world's needs for more energy to power progress, what we really need is more but cleaner energy, given the reality of climate change. So our purpose, as we articulated it at that time, was Shell will provide solutions to help power progress, which are by providing more and cleaner energy solutions. And we chose very early on to not tell investors or the public about it. In fact, the first time we revealed it externally was 5 years later, last year, when I was ready to tell the world about it. Because we said, let's just do stuff and not start telling lots of stories on our website about it. And so we instituted something called the Purpose to Customer Value Proposition Program, which I designed and led. We did it in 75 businesses, one at a time, each of them multi-billion-dollar businesses in a $300 billion company. So from Bolivia to Brunei, from China to Chile, we were basically working with individual business leaders to try and actively find out ways to make money by doing good. How do you bake the purpose into your business strategy such that it becomes sustainable for the long term from a both shareholder and SDG point of view, which is always difficult, but you have to do it one at a time. We followed a methodical framework which really, really worked. And we really wanted to use the word CSR, as my friend Kevin said, as the new 4-letter word, right? This is all about impact at scale, right? So we were able to transform, and now I'll share a few, but we have now over 100 proof points and case studies where we have changed the business model, sales team incentives, leader incentives, to drive cleaner energy solutions. For B2B customers, we've figured out how to make money from selling decarbonization. How do you take your retail sites? We are the world's largest retailer by numbers, 46,000 stores. How do you transform them into urban electric charging hubs? How do you take a truck fleet that you've been supplying diesel to and work with that owner and the OEMs who make the trucks to transform and incentivize them to move to hydrogen-powered or LNG-powered trucks? How do you transform the entire indirect level of employment that you create at each of our retail sites? So we've started hiring a lot of people who are differently abled in our retail sites, which gives them pride and joy, which gives them a source of employment. We've also found ways that if you incentivize your intermediaries who in the past were incentivized by things like money or sales bonuses, to kind of look at them as human beings and say, if I give them group insurance, especially, for example, mechanics who recommend and are a major player in driving lubricant sales, and if you give them group health insurance and you give them health checkups instead of the usual bicycle by selling so many cases of lubricants, which has been done in the industry for 50 years, our sales grew double digits amongst those people because they said, this company treats me like a human being. So I have 100 such examples where you can make money by doing good, whether it's a B2B business, a B2C business with premium decarbonized zero carbon products. But that is where human innovation comes in, and that's where a methodical approach comes in. And we were then able to say, okay, from a couple of years ago, the 16,000 top leaders of the company now, their annual bonus depends on the level of decarbonization that the company as a whole has achieved, amongst other things. It used to be safety and cash. It has broadened to include decarbonization. Our investment proposal documents, which historically have had IRR, NPV, the usual stuff, now have a very focused conversation and not a checkbox on decarbonization, societal impact, SDG impact. So it's a very real approach. Every company can do it, which is my main provocation today. Every company can step up and find an SDG or multiple SDGs that are relevant to their value chain, their business model, find a way to make money by doing that, and transition away. And I genuinely believe just transition is honestly practical transition. Otherwise, the transition won't happen.
Sure, I wholeheartedly agree. There's no way we can have a just transition without inclusive economic growth, not just economic growth, but inclusive economic growth from the lens of environmental as well as social needs. So it's true, the numbers that we see confirm, all the things that you've said. There's going to be continued growth in population, global population growth, increase in demand for energy. And the one word that I would say unites both environmental and social needs for a just transition is access. Right? So how do we access clean energy when it's so expensive right now? We need that innovation to lower the green premium. We need the innovation to lower the costs so that emerging markets, anyone can access it much more readily. And we know that emerging markets will be disproportionately affected, right, by climate change. Now, to Bryan's point earlier, the just transition is not just about environment, it's about social as well. I mean, even today, during COVID, about almost 40% of the population did not have access to the internet. And then within that, 30% of school children did not have access to the internet globally. And so, especially during COVID, when children's education is disruptive, or even without COVID, even before that, 40% of the world still doesn't have access to the internet. That's a lifeline for so many to have access to financial banking, right? Formal financial credit. That's a lifeline, the internet, for many to get access to education. It's just so essential, especially in our increasingly digitized world. And so from a social just transition lens, the very basics just need to be there. Access to the internet, access to education, access to basic healthcare, safe shelter, affordable housing. Without that, so much of the world will still be stuck in that cycle, and that gap between those that have nots and those that have all the opportunities will just widen. And so that just transition is all about access to clean energy at a lower cost, access to basic needs. And that provides the foundation for everything else, human empowerment, collaboration, the interconnectedness that we see as stated through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So in order for that to happen, the innovation is needed, but also the investments at every stage of a business life cycle, early stage, venture capital, angel investing, all the way to public equities, across all asset classes, bonds as well. So the options and the inclusiveness of different financial products for all the different needs, I think that's the key, the inclusiveness of the solutions.
Would anybody like to respond or add on?
Yeah, I would just echo the importance of inclusiveness and acknowledge that while there are a lot of opportunities to make money while pursuing a just transition, there are always going to be some gaps, right? Where even a thoughtful set of principles and initiatives like Rahul laid out can make a huge difference. There are going to be gaps, and those are going to need to be filled by public actors for some of the basic needs that Quyen talked about. So it's about a combination of each sector, if you will, the public sector, the private sector, doing their part and taking this lens of inclusion so that both the collective needs are met and that different groups aren't left behind like they have been by prior transitions and developments.
Great. So maybe on this note, I just again request or remind the audience that you do not need to wait until the final 15 minutes. If you have a question, feel free to put up your hand. And as you think about your questions, could I request for the organizations to just pull up the couple of slides that I had prepared beforehand, and just to show and have everybody on the same page. Great. So this is a slide which I got from, I think there are a whole bunch of people who have worked on it. The source is below on the slide. But really what it shows is the spectrum of what is traditional investing, right, on the far left of the slide, to the philanthropic donations on the far right, and what is in between. So I think as investors, maybe Quyen, if you could chip in, better activism is probably where we're looking at investors moving from the far left slowly towards the center, moving towards more responsible investing. Yep, okay. Where the focus is not just limiting to no regard for ESG practices and moving towards risk mitigation with regards to ESG, or moving towards doing more good.
I wear glasses because I can't read that.
Okay, no problem.
But based on what I'm hearing you say, and I think you need glasses too.
I think I need glasses too.
But I agree. We want to be self-sufficient. We don't want to rely on donations and philanthropy. That will always play a critical role. Philanthropic organizations will play such an important role that non-philanthropic businesses will never fulfill. They have a key place, right, in the solutions. Now, as far as in general asset managers are concerned, yes, we have that fiduciary, at least at BlackRock. By law, we have a fiduciary obligation to generate financial performance for our clients. It's their money, it's not our money. And they trust us to invest with that fiduciary mindset. And so, yes, when we incorporate beta activism, that structural systematic lens, it is, at the end of the day, about how the company will perform and be resilient through all the risks that it will face, especially climate risks. But the end goal is, for both to be achieved, right? For businesses to be better equipped and to be solutions provider to the extent that they can be to these climate risks and social inclusion needs, while at the same time still generate those financial returns, enduring returns over the long term for clients, for which we owe that fiduciary obligation. So we're right in the middle.
Great. Yeah.
Bryan, if I may, if you map impact on this, you may find decreasing absolute impact after the middle.
Decreasing?
Absolute impact in terms of the number of people's lives or the amount of carbon you're taking out. Because what happens is when you don't have market returns, there is no incentive for the masses of individual entrepreneurs, SMEs, and privately held organizations to really go all out. I think the example I also like to give, which is non-Shell from my previous FMCG background, is Unilever was having difficulty distributing their shampoos and soaps into the villages in India. So they created this program called Shakti, which means power in the context of women. And over the years, they've hired 160,000 women entrepreneurs who have gone from, say, zero income or helping out in the farm to now making only $40 a month. But that $40 a month in a village in India is a lot of money. And Unilever is today making hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, of turnover from that network. And now they've expanded it, they've gone into credit, they're helping them start businesses. And there are many, many such examples from, if you look at C.K. Prehlad's bottom of the pyramid model, there is so much opportunity to be somewhere in the middle of that continuum, in my view.
Go ahead.
Talking about, I think more and more our institutional investors now putting ESG criteria as their investment decision making. But I think the challenge will be, how do institutional investors handle their invested company who actually greenwashing their sustainability activities? How do they identify that? Then it goes back, actually there's so much institutional investors can detect, that they are really doing greenwashing and there's no substance in their reporting. And even to a certain extent, even regulators they have certain limitation. The most important, back to the board governance. The first person to stop companies from from greenwashing will be the board members itself, the independent directors. So the question will be, what is the level or state of independence of independent directors? Are you knowledgeable enough and capable to challenge management? Or you're there because of your connection and you do not want to rock the boat, you do not want to question the management and just accept it. So therefore, the appointment of independent directors is actually very important. So as institutional investors, you find that the company is actually not practicing what they reported, then I think the institutional investors collectively must do their voting decision. Not in silo, but together. That's where you can make the difference. Yeah.
Great. Just in reflecting back on the spectrum that's up on the screen right now, I think, it gets orange at responsible investing. And there are returns, positive returns to be had, market rate returns, and responsible investing, sustainable investing, impact investing. So it can unlock the kind of opportunities that you talked about. And when we see impact first investors come in, those are investors that have a development mandate, an impact mandate, and they may have some flex on the financial returns that they have. The power in those generally is to bridge between when something can become attractive enough and grow to the point where a market rate investor can unleash that opportunity, sort of bridging through that valley of death, if you will, with a very impact-oriented lens, can be pretty powerful. And I know up here it says traditional investing on the left, but if to the right of it is responsible investing, I think it would be fair to say the opposite would be irresponsible investing, and I don't know who wants to be in that particular bucket anymore. So it seems like some of these factors should probably be accounted for in any investing that folks are doing these days.
Well, so I personally represent an investor as well, as an employee of Khazanah. So I can only say that we can only invest, we can only do impact investments or responsible investments if the companies and the corporates play ball, right, do their part. So if we move to the next slide, it's the same spectrum, but from the lenses of the business of the company. So we have the traditional businesses on the left and the charity or pure NGOs on the right. And in between, we have responsible businesses, sustainable businesses, impact businesses, social enterprises, and non-profit with income-generating activities. My eyesight has improved a little bit. Great. So, yeah, so I think one question that comes to mind is, I was looking, as I was preparing for this panel discussion, and I was looking at the internet, and there was this organization in the UK, I believe, that says that one of the first things we should do is to change all our listed companies from being PLCs, public listed companies, to public benefit companies, right? Which is basically a total change in the mindset from being primarily responsible to shareholders to actually all stakeholders. So that, of course, is a pretty drastic change, if we were to carry that out cross-board, but perhaps this is a good trigger for more discussion.
So I don't know about changing all the companies, but I think there are some pretty profound positive examples of public benefit corporations. I think the most dramatic one that had some announcements recently is Patagonia, which is an outdoor apparel manufacturer, which has always had a bunch of positive initiatives in terms of they always gave 1% of their profits back to the planet. They always used recycled materials. They actually will recycle their own clothes. You can return them. They'll sell used clothes, which not a lot of apparel manufacturers will do that. They have really strong labor practices. They've worked in the US with indigenous communities to build up proportions of their supply chain. So a variety of different things. And then the founder a few weeks ago made the unprecedented, I believe, step of donating the entire corporation to a trust that would benefit climate change in perpetuity. So that's sort of the most extreme version, I think, that we've ever seen of any large-scale public benefit corporation. And that public benefit corporation designation frees a founder and a management team up from potential litigation from shareholders, is the most sort of concrete thing that it does. But it also frees up their minds to think more expansively about why are we here? Who are we trying to serve through our work? Yes, it's to have customers and generate revenue, but is there something more? It goes back to Bono's quote about being amoral versus immoral and capitalism needing some instructions. This gives a window for people to identify opportunities to give those instructions.
I mean, I believe the Tata group of companies in India, I'm not sure, but I did hear that the ownership is at a trust level. And 40% of all they make from cars and hotels and everything else goes towards dozens, if not hundreds of activities. So that privately owned companies or family companies can obviously execute something like that. But I think the challenge, as you rightly said, is how do you go from a publicly listed to a public benefit without regulatory intervention?
And building on the Tata example in India, there's a mandate that companies have to give 2% of net profits back through CSR activities, which sometimes is a throwaway thing, but when you get to 2% of net profits, for some of these organizations, that is a very material sum of money. It gets the attention of management, of the community, and some of the organizations, some of the corporations are doing pretty profound things on sanitation, education, gender equity, climate resilience with those resources. And it seems to be making a pretty significant difference. So it's not all the way to a public benefit corp, but it is a mandate that corporations have some public benefit as a part of their work.
When we see public benefit corporations and public equities, they're a wonderful opportunity from an impact investing lens. It is hard for companies to switch all the way like that, for many companies. And so still there are incremental steps they can take. For example, getting a B Corp certification, disclosing better data, more transparent data, whether it's using the TCFD framework or other types of frameworks that's well recognized globally. So there are steps that companies can take along the way, but all the way to a PBC, that has legal benefits of protecting you against lawsuits, that you're not placing financial first, but you're balancing financial plus environmental or social impact. So there's a gradient, and it's nice to see that it's much more adopted more and more, and not so much of a myth anymore.
I must admit that I'm a beneficiary of Patagonia. I was living in the States for a year when my son was 7 years old. We bought a winter jacket, and I think about 10 years, no, he's not 17 yet. About 5 years later, when we were living in China, and of course he has totally outgrown the jacket, and there was something wrong with the zipper, we just went back to the shop and said that, well, could we have this zipper fixed? And Patagonia said that, well, I'll just give you a new one. And I said, okay, but my son has actually grown 2 sizes larger. And he's like, well, we just give you a new one 2 sizes larger. No questions asked. Yeah. So, I don't know, maybe Asian consumers might, like me, will take advantage of that. Okay. On this note, another offer or questions from the floor? Right at the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Noripa. It was mentioned by the panel, and I remember it was Leah saying it just now, that one of the solutions to the challenge in identifying, in how institutional investors can identify greenwashing is through board governance. But really, there are also other challenges in trying to find a solution to such challenges. And I think the other two is how to solve the lack of disclosures, and thirdly, how to solve inconsistencies in the ESG data. I mean, there are voluminous ESG data out there, and you just cannot do it manually. So we were thinking the only solution is technology, in which case we can use probably 2 disruptors on ESG. One is, of course, the artificial intelligence, and the second, you can use the ESG data. So that way, the sustainable data are made available and comparable among all the stakeholders, which includes for better activism. So I actually need comments from the technology side of the panel. Thank you.
Anybody like to respond to that?
I could.
No.
Want to go first?
No. Okay, just a short comment because I'm not talking about technology. Back to what Datuk Noripa mentioned just now. You know, the challenges and how do we measure that whatever disclosed as a substance and what they practice. But you see, WUSA under the new sustainability framework, they also mandated that there might be assurance to a certain degree. However, that also is not foolproof that there was no error. If you recall recently, one company had outrageous error in the negative emissions, which I think is not acceptable because it's certified by third party, independent third party. So the data, the integrity of the data is actually very important. The assurance, the person who did the third party independent who did the assurance also you must ensure that there's integrity. It's not so much of making money. You must ensure that there must really be the substance there. And it's true. It's not no errors, nothing. Because it's impossible to put in recycling as negative. But we know that. So I think that is actually very fundamental, outrageous, like I mentioned. So it's very important. And of course, the board, especially the independent directors, you should be able to speak up and challenge. First of all, you must have the ability and the experience and the knowledge to challenge management, and do not take their words for it. You know, at even the risk of you being removed. That is the principle that independent directors should have, not beholden to the non-independent or the major shareholder or even the founder. I think that is very important.
Yeah, certainly. You know, integrity, right? And reporting is the foundation. You have to have that. I do think in terms of technology, it can help, you know, with natural language processing to find outliers. But I'd like to share this really excellent study by MIT, so Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Professor Rigabon and his team conducted a study on ESG ratings and how similar or dissimilar the ratings are among the major providers, MSCI, Sustainalytics, you know, there was a whole set. And they found there was very little similarities, very little correlation among the ESG ratings, and then when you look at the E ratings among the providers, and then the S, and then the G, even lower correlations. And so the conclusion that I follow is, you know, I liken ESG ratings to that of sell-side research. So sell-side research for any company, for any same company, Morgan Stanley might have a strong buy rating, whereas Goldman Sachs might have a strong sell rating. You know, and we don't expect sell side to agree. And so it's up to the investors or whomever it is who's analyzing and trying to discern what they can take from that ESG rating to realize that, you know, it's just a starting point, just like sell side research. You don't just go with Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. You have to make your own judgment. But the one thing that I've noticed that can really help not just regulators, but us discern between greenwashing and not greenwashing in terms of ESG rating is just going back to the very basics. An ESG rating, by definition, and this is MSCI's, but also it's the same for Sustainalytics and others. An ESG rating simply captures a company's ability to manage its exposure to material ESG risks. So if I were a company and my headquarters is along a coastline, I have very, very high climate risk, especially physical climate risk. There's sea levels rising, there's extreme weather events, tornadoes, hurricanes, more extreme flooding. So just because my company is located on the coastline, I have a poor ESG rating. Now, I decide to move my company inland. I eliminated all of that physical climate risk. My ESG rating goes up. So it goes up because I'm better managing my ESG risks. But did my moving my headquarters inland make any progress on the environment? No, I made no progress on sustainability. I simply increased my ESG score because that's the definition of an ESG rating. So if we understood that and what it was intended for versus using ESG to equate to sustainability, I think there'd be a lot less greenwashing, accidental greenwashing. Now, if I were a company and I really did improve sustainability outcomes, for example, for my employees, I gave them better healthcare benefits, job training, et cetera, and I am a better steward of the environment, with clean energy, solar panels installed, better water efficiency in my operations, then yes, my ESG score increasing does reflect sustainability progress. So ESG can reflect sustainability progress. At the same time, it may not in the case of that company moving headquarters. And so I think just down to the basic methodology, it's not about technology necessarily or about Professor Riggenbaum's study that there's low correlation among them. If we just step back and look at the simple definition and what it's meant to be and how it's accidentally misapplied sometimes, because everyone's just so eager, to do good. Everyone's just so eager to show that they can make progress. It's just often accidentally misunderstood. But that's what an ESG rating is. And so I think that's the biggest problem, fueling the accidental greenwashing, unfortunately.
Rahul?
I think from my experience, for the investor levels, absolutely correct. We really need greater coordination, greater collaboration, and a shorter list of metrics. To drive action, however, what we found in my businesses, where I've done this with 70, 75 businesses now, is you may end up with KPIs that have little relevance to the grassroots business leader in this quest to have just 3 or 4 metrics that you're reporting at the group level. So my favor is always to do both. So you need to have a few metrics at the group level, but we've always allowed individual leaders to actively search for what drives their personal motivation, what is relevant to their business value chain, whichever of the SDGs, and then a couple of the ones that are at the group level, and then stitch it together into a business dashboard that motivates them, drives them, and does not give them, does not allow the pursuit of false KPIs, which have very little relevance on the grassroots level.
There's a question, number 5. And perhaps we could also flash up the online questions, if we have any.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mei Yi, and thank you so much for this panel. I would like to kind of turn the question around because this conversation has been about how investors can invest. If I would turn the question around and said, what advice would you give to startups, so social entrepreneurs and so on? So if a social enterprise has got more resources, we are definitely much better able to provide the sort of documentation that you do in your research and trying to find out things about the organization. But what if you are a scrappy startup, right? Doing work on the ground, but hoping to get some form of impact investment, but not having the sort of resources to put forth the sort of documentation and things that you're looking for. So asking as someone from a scrappy startup. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. That's a great question. Chris, could I have you?
Sure, happy to. Thank you for the question. I think, from the scrappy startup perspective, you have the benefits of, being able to identify real problems that you can solve for your customers, right? And ensuring that those are aligned with sustainable development goals and that you can tell a story that both works logically and that you actually, hopefully over time, can gather some data that says, okay, if we're an ed tech startup, here's the problem we're trying to solve, here's how our technology advances literacy, numeracy, whatever it might be, and do that in a fairly rigorous way over time. I think that is, in the early stages, that intentionality, you hear intentionality a lot in the impact investing world, and less focus on what people would characterize as ESG, which is more about how you manage your business, because a startup is so small, the how matters a little bit less than the what your products and services actually are out in the world, just from a materiality perspective. So focusing on that focusing on making the case for the impact that your products or services can have in the world. The one untapped resource, or often untapped resource, that exists out there is that there are professors and economists and evaluators out there in the world literally doing hundreds of thousands, if not about 1 million evaluations a year on different interventions that are supposed to boost incomes or improve health outcomes or enhance educational attainment, reduce gender inequities. So they're actually, even though what you're doing might be novel in your own context, in your own environment, there may be information out there that you can glean from the world of academia just through Googling things and identifying studies that have been done, so that you can say, not only are you hearing from your customers that this is making a difference in their lives and meeting a real challenge that they are facing, but also there's additional research and evidence to support that in the grand scheme of things, this is also is the kind of thing that has been proven to make a difference in an even more rigorous way over time. So I think that kind of focus and emphasis on the results and the impact that you're getting for your customers and what that means for reductions in carbon emissions, increased educational attainment, et cetera, is the core of what we see investors typically looking at for the early stages.
Okay. Do we have any online questions? Okay. So if we could take one online question, and we'll come to you. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So for Leah, what are some of the challenges that Institutional Investor Council of Malaysia is facing right now in driving better activism in Malaysia? Or what should you do more of?
Some of the challenges, yeah. Of course, some of the challenges, like I said, we have just recently published a new code, but we must understand that the state of readiness among the institutional investors actually different. We have the largest institutional investors who are asset owners. They already reached certain standards, and they are already there. In fact, they already started to publish their sustainability framework, and their plan and targets. We don't even talk about whether they really can meet the target. That is another question, because everyone can plan, everyone can have target, but at the end of the day, will you be able to achieve the target? And I heard some of them don't even know how to achieve that target. They just publish something Malaysian style, publish something, worry about how to do it later, So I think that's typical Malaysian style, So I think, but you also have the second tier institutional investors where they are still struggling even governance, internal governance within themselves. So they are still trying hard, but we at institutional investor, we always tell them the code will be the guidance for everyone. And now we have one step further. The earlier code in 2014 was you just tell the story that how you apply the code, but now no. If you depart from the code, from the application, you must explain why and give the time frame when you're going to meet the target. So it's going to be watertight. And of course, we also identify certain key stewardship, we call it stewardship spotlight. We identify certain key governance and sustainability matters, where all our signatories, who are the institutional investors now, must collectively vote according to that recommended. Yeah? But the issue here also is that the challenge is that not many of our institutional investors actually publish their voting principles and voting decision. Only few so far, about 3 has published their voting principle and voting very clearly. They are the large asset owners. We are still waiting for others. In fact, we want them to be transparent in how they're voting on certain resolution. In fact, moving forward, it's just not about publishing your voting after the event. You should follow CalPERS. Even before the event, you start telling the whole world, this is how you're going to vote against certain resolution. And we don't have to worry about parting, acting, and consent. We will handle that, in a more legalistic way. So we are not, because all of us are actually promoting good, high standards of governance. So I think that, but it's quite difficult. I mean, we already reached, since we established IIC, I'm glad to say that we already reached a certain level. And we are going to be more vocal in raising issues, not only at the organization itself, but also at IIC level. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. the gentleman in the front, would you like to? Yes, just behind you. Okay.
How should investors view a company that provides energy to rural and remote areas, but has no plans to provide cleaner energy, unlike Shell?
It's a tricky question.
I have a bias, so I can say, because leadership is all about tough decisions, right? So my bias is start providing that energy because it'll power progress, community development, social development, access to education in ways that you've never thought possible. Energy is such a powerful trigger for other change. And then once you've got that, then try and build in the microgrids and other things to make it cleaner. But versus zero, I think the first step is energy access. That's my bias.
So one thing to add to that, we actually were asked to look at a company just like this for an investor client. And we did a quantitative analysis of the benefits, the primarily economic benefits and the trickle-down benefits for health and education that would arise from access to energy. And we looked at the negative externalities, the carbon, the social cost of carbon and the impacts that would have over time. For that particular context where that deal was looking to take place, the positives outweighed the negatives, even when we accounted for a long-term social cost of carbon. And the investor, for PR reasons, still decided not to do the investment, to be perfectly honest. That was what happened, but that was when we looked at the data for that particular instance, it led to a similar conclusion.
And even the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, within those goals there are targets, 169 targets, and one of the targets is for clean energy, increase the adoption of clean energy worldwide. But there's another target that emphasizes the importance of just providing energy. So it is not incompatible with sustainability progress to provide energy. I mean, you have to have it.
Okay, we just have a couple of minutes left, so perhaps we just go around the panel for closing remarks, and maybe we could start with, from my furthest away, Rahul.
So thank you for listening. If there are any companies out there, I encourage you to step up. It's absolutely possible to make a difference. If there's anybody who's going to make a difference on this planet and for its people, it's the corporations, in my view. So contact me if you need help.
Okay, to me is that when you talk about governance, when you talk about better activism, when you talk about shareholder activism, it should not just be lip service. We might be seen as serious wanting to do it. And whenever we have a document as a guide or to guide us to do the right thing, it's not just something that nice to have, but something that we must have and we must implement it to the spirit. Not just having it so that people know we have this document, but we don't even really follow it. Yeah.
Thank you, Leah.
And sorry, another one. and for the independent directors, I'm very sure we have some independent directors here. Please be aware that you have heavy fiduciary duties to fulfill, not just as someone last week mentioned rent seeker, but I would say that it's not just about getting extra pocket money or even extra retirement fund. You have fiduciary duties to do it. And bear in mind that institutional investors are not very seriously looking at how you perform at the board level to the extent that you may be removed one day.
To try to crystallize some of the different concepts that we've talked about, when clients ask us about how to have, how to maximize their impact, we talk about 6 characteristics, which I'll go through super fast. One is to be impact first. Know what your objectives are and align your strategy around that. The second is that you need to make a sustained, consistent commitment. I think it was 5 years that you were working on your decarbonization initiative before you even talked about it. Social change is not a quarterly results thing. It takes decades. Have your strategy, organization, and incentives aligned around that impact. Use data, gather feedback, learn and improve. This is a new skill for a lot of investors and corporates. So you just have to get started and continuously improve. Collaborate. None of these problems are going to be solved in a silo or alone. And center equity so that you can end up with inclusive results at the end.
Yeah, just all those words resonate. You know, inclusiveness, don't do it alone, collaborate. Whoever's starting this social enterprise, you can reach out to me. I'm a professor of impact investing, and I have a professor network globally. I can circulate your idea and ask for help, you know, no matter what. If you're confused about ESG, especially because they don't match across the industry, don't let that dishearten you to get started and ask tough questions, and don't let impact measurement, as imperfect as it is, be a mitigant, you know, to getting started. Because as long as you get started, measure your impact. You may not have perfect knowledge of what ESG looks like as a scrappy startup, but you know, as long as you start with your intention, explicitly transparent, and your effort there, you will get feedback, you know, from those whom you ask, and you will grow really quickly, get better really fast, and you won't be alone for very long. So the tools are there. You can get started.
Great. Thank you. And if I would just add mine, it would be, I think, just transition. I think there is definitely a case where the developed markets really need to lend its support, whether it's financially or technology, or just know-how to the emerging market countries. And I think even within the emerging market countries, there is then a different level of just transition considerations where larger corporations need to help out the smaller ones. With that, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together to thank our panel.